So continuing on from my series on myths, food myths or diet myths, there is another one out there and it's called margarine is better than butter. So if we take an historical perspective, which we've already talked about, how long have we been eating margarine and how long have we been eating butter? So butter was seen as a food that caused heart disease, but butter is an old food that's causing a rather new disease. Whereas margarine is a new food, and perhaps that was the problem with this whole butter thing. So let's first talk about the history of margarine. So margarine started around the 1910, 1920 with a company called Procter & Gamble. They were two brothers and they made, or brothers-in-laws I should say, and they made candles and soap. And they used lard and tallow in order to do this. But the lard and tallow would go off if they made too many of their candles and their soap. So they commissioned a scientist to make something, a fat, that never went off. And so this scientist figured out that if they hydrogenated a vegetable oil, then it would be a fat that never went off. And that's now why you get soya candles or soaps that are made with vegetable oils as opposed to lard or tallow. And as a result, this is the way they made their soaps and candles. After some time, candles were not needed as much. And they had this wonderful technology. And this top technology showed that it was a vegetable oil that never went off. And if they dyed it white, it looked like lard or tallow. And they called it Crisco. And it always came with a recipe book when it was sold in the grocery store. So Crisco then took over from lard and tallow as a fat that never went off. Then what they did was that rather than hydrogenating it, they partially hydrogenated it, which means that they didn't saturate it as much, which means it wasn't as hard in the fridge. So this partial hydrogenation created a butter-like substance, which they then dyed yellow and put a flavor into it and called it the cheap version of butter. In some states of America, they wanted it dyed pink because they didn't want anybody thinking that it was butter. Then when the low-fat revolution started, butter or margarine became the healthy version of butter. And then in the 80s, when cholesterol became a problem, margarine became something that would lower your cholesterol. But instead of it being on margarine, on the merits of margarine, they added a plant sterol to it. And science has shown that those plant sterols that have been so much talked about in lowering your cholesterol are not necessarily the be-all and end-all. Then from there, in 2009, front headline news, trans fats cause heart disease more than saturated fats do. So partial hydrogenation of a vegetable oil, which is how we made margarine, caused or created trans fats, which became a real health issue. So instead of saying, well, margarine's no good, let's kick it out and let's go back to butter, they changed the formulation of margarine. And they started to do something called intersterification. And this intersterification is what is done to vegetable oils in order to make, and it's not called margarine anymore, I don't know if you've noticed that. It's actually called a spread, a vegetable spread. So go to the grocery store, have a look, see if there's any margarines there, or is it more called Meadow-Lee or Proactive, or like any of these, it could be Olivio. So these are intersterified vegetable oils. Now, preliminary research out of a place in Malaysia showed that this caused a pre-diabetic state, these intersterified fats. They're not in nature. They never have been in nature. They're man-made. So be very, very careful about these vegetable oils. Be careful of solid vegetable oils or shortenings as they're called. I like butter. I think butter has been around forever. It's not only just saturated fat, but if it's grass-fed, it has omega-3s, it has butyric acid in it, and butter is probably the only food, I believe, that has butyric acid in it. So butyric acid is something that helps nourish your intestinal lining. If you eat a polysaccharide or an oligosaccharide, which is your fibers, when you consume them, they pass through your intestine because you can't digest them, and they go into the large intestine, and your microbiome produces butyric acid. So as long as you're eating fibrous foods and a little bit of butter, then what you have is a wonderful source of butyric acid, which then nourishes your intestinal lining. So in short, margarine is not healthier than butter. Margarine is not good for your heart, and neither are those shortenings. Go back to old traditional butters. Get organic if you can, salted or unsalted. Use it in your cooking. It's very stable in your cooking, yeah, let's go back to butter. I hope you enjoyed that. Bye for now.